look at the present. Oh, I just said broadcast is live.
Where'd all that come from?
We're live right now.
Oh, are
but
we?
unprepared. Oh no, it says uploading recordings.
All right, so Sal's gone. So should we assume that we're
I guess. I don't
Yeah,
know.
you just want to run the intro?
Yeah, why not? Let's do it.
You're listening to Around Comics. 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 Comics.
All right, there you go. So Sal's not here. It's going to be a little bit of an experiment. Tom and I are going to talk some comics. I swear to goodness. But yeah, I'm assuming that our tens of viewers and listeners are enjoying.
Oh yeah, we're live.
Right.
Oh yeah, I can see us on Facebook.
The old intro.
I mean, what was that?
Try to do the old intro. I haven't been in the host chair for a while.
Okay, yeah,
No.
sure.
Yeah. All right, here we go.
Do whatever strikes your fancy.
All right, get a little drink of that. All right, from Chicago, this is Around Comics, the comic culture podcast, where we talk about comics. We talk about comics and comics culture. I already messed it up. So anyway, I'm Christopher Neesman. This is Tom Caters. Hi, Tom.
Hi. Hey, what's up?
I don't know. It's
comics culture.
Comics and comics culture.
It's culture.
Yeah. So anyway, as you can tell, Sal's not here this week, so trying to kind of and Wayne has already said that he's binging Film Force 5. Wayne, we're not going to talk about Film Force 5. We're going to talk about Around Comics. Tom, good sir, you have brought a subject to the table that we were going to launch the show with.
Oh my god.
What is said subject?
Oh, which one? I was talking about homeless people, but I assume that's not. Before we figured out how to start recording. Dark Knight Strikes Again.
Yeah.
Which I read I read it right after I read Dark Knight Returns. I'm gonna pull a Chris. Like, we're all in different spots, so I feel like we should all things that the other person does.
Sal is watching at home, and so he loves that I am at Brian Salazar right now.
Yeah, he's the absolute Dark Knight. I just did a Chris. That's a Chris thing.
Here, I'll match your
match
your Chris with another Chris.
Nice.
So yeah, you went kind of in depth on.
I don't think I've read that since it came out.
Like, really?
I never, when I read Dark Knight Returns in my absolute, by the time I get to the end, I'm just like, okay. Like, I was like, I never feel like going on to reading Dark Knight Strikes Again.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been so long that I was like, oh my god, that's right. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, Superman and Wonder Woman have a kid, and they have sex in it. You know,
things happen.
Things happen. And I was like, oh yeah, now I remember this book.
I got into a conversation with someone years ago about this, and they kind of put the light bulb on for me, is that you kind of have to read it, not as a satire, but you kind of have to read it a little bit as a comedy. It's a weird book.
I don't know. I don't know if it's a comedy, because like I feel like it's meaner. It's actually like meaner to the audience in a way, whereas like I think Dark Knight Returns has a empathy for people. Dark Knight Strikes Again kind of doesn't. It's like a little harder edged and a little like part of me is like I almost wish it wasn't like a sequel to Dark Knight Returns, because I think it actually isn't really. I mean, it is sort of, but not like the entire approach of it's so different.
It's his Justice League book.
Yeah, it's just a Frank Miller Justice League. Yeah, and like it barely feels like the Batman is related to the Batman that we saw, and you know, like he's I don't know, he's just very like I felt like in Dark Knight Returns there's like a lot of depth to that character, and you know, in this one it's just he's very flat. But I kind of felt that way about a lot of the characters in this, was like they're very like, you know, it sort of works with the art, you know, there's not a lot of like there to any of the characters.
Not a ton of depth. They're kind of reduced to a core Frank Miller idea of that character.
Of what it is.
And, you know, that's what I remember about the book when it came out was, you know, Dark Knight Returns was such a visually stunning, visually arresting book that looked like nothing else on the stands at that point. It was an artistic evolution for Frank Miller, and it connected with. I mean, people picked that up. And, this shit is cool. Dark Knight Strikes Again comes out, and it was, if I remember correctly, was it digitally colored? There was, it was kind of the dawn of some new technology. It was a different visual presentation than Strikes Back, and it did not connect with people, I think would be a nice way of saying that. Yeah.
Yes, it would be a way of saying, like, people were like, whoa, what book is this? Yeah, I haven't read it in a long time.
Yeah.
And I was like,
people wanted
like
Dark Knight Strikes Back, like
yeah.
2. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's a wild book that I think I would feel about it much differently if it was just its own thing. And it wasn't like, I think the combination of it being like kind of a sequel to this book, but it's kind of not. I mean, it's like, like definitely a different vision of like the Justice League that kind of, you know, it takes place in that world, but honestly, it doesn't, like, it's not so tight to it that you couldn't just be like, this is another world where, you know, like where Lex Luthor is running everything, because so much of the book is so much more about just like, what happened to this character? This is what Plastic Man is up to, you know, like it's just like going through all the characters and being
was Frank Miller the writer who said that Plastic Man was one of the most powerful members of the Justice League? Do I remember that correctly?
I think a couple people have brought that up, and but yeah, I mean, he uses him like that in Dark Knight Strikes Again, but yeah, it's just such a wild, different book that like feels so not actually a sequel.
Yeah,
and it's like, oh yeah, that's right. A lot of people hated this, and it's like I
despised it.
Like, it got very strong reactions. The fact that, you know, the art does.
Here's Wayne's comment. Which I think he's not the only person. It was my comic shop offered to buy back my floppies because the owner knew I wouldn't like the story.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it makes sense as you see the arc of Frank Miller's career to be like, oh, of course, the guy who made All-Star Batman and Robin made this.
Yeah,
like, yeah, obviously, like, but at the time, I remember just being like, what is this? I didn't like the art. Like, I thought it was sort of like, I didn't like that coloring technique and the way things felt kind of like sort of flat. And like, I think it has like, it's dated. Like when you look at it, it's like,
in a weird way, is it one of those strange comics that a couple decades on you can read it? Do you get more of what he was going for? Has it aged maybe better than when it came out, or is it just kind of this weird thing that exists?
I feel like it's a weird thing because I feel like it's to me it's different. It's a really different book where there's less of the subtlety of like the moments in Dark Knight Returns where he kind of balances those things out that we talked. Like a lot of that is not in that.
Everything's right in your face.
Everything's directly in your face and like very like the way Dark Knight kind of had like a density to it from like the 9-panel grid, whereas Dark Knight Strikes Again, there's these huge spreads that are just sort of like, it was just like, it just felt so different. It like it still feels to me like a weird outlier. Like I don't quite know. Like I'm like, I feel different about the story now than I did when I was younger, because I think I was probably more like wanted that sequel to Dark Knight Returns.
You went
now
DKR
older,
too. Yeah.
Just looking at it being like, oh, this should have just been like Frank Miller's Justice League. And I would have felt way differently about the story if that,
but comics being comics, to have and it was years later. It was not like this came out like in 1987.
No, this was like 15 years. So like long chunk of time.
It was DKR at that point had cemented itself as one of the, every top 5 list of greatest graphic novels of all time usually has Watchmen and DKR in the top 2. DKR is, I think, probably widely recognized as being the second greatest graphic novel of all time. There were expectations when this came out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like now in hindsight, being like not so invested in that, I'm like, oh, okay, like I get what this story is. It is like an over-the-top Justice League like type tale, and it's like based on those merits alone, like the story is fine. Like, it's very Frank Miller. Like it makes sense. Art-wise, I think a lot of those like digital techniques, I think haven't aged that well, and it just feels very like, oh yeah, that's right. This, and it's funny when you see like the sketches in the back, and you're like, oh, like that's interesting. I wish some of that had made its way into the printed version, whereas it felt like a lot of like elements that were within his like pencils did not like kind of survive the process. And it became very just like flat and very like not a whole lot of depth.
Yeah, we talk a lot of time. It's Sal especially talks about respecting when creators, whether it's comic creators or film directors, whenever they take big swings, even if those are swings and misses. Do you feel like this was a big swing by Miller and it maybe, didn't connect, but it's still a big swing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there are still like sequences in here that are gorgeous. It's not like the whole thing's like artistically junk, but there's just moments where you're like, oh, that kind of like, that looks like it came out in 2000. In a way, like sometimes there's just like, oh, okay, yeah. And then there's like
way back in 2000.
There's really beautiful panels, and then there's like ones where you're like, like I don't know, like what we're going for. And I just think like the storytelling is also just like not as tight. Just like it's just like sometimes I will get lost in the story. I'm like, what is happening here? Like it was.
This is if I can get my frame of reference correct. So DKR happens. Frank Miller goes on, does a few other kind of like, cornerstone works around that time. And then he does Sin City. So does this take place after Sin City had kind of started. Was Sin City kind of his like mid 90s work?
I'm trying to look it up right now because I'm trying to remember
because
like the sequence of like
of his like evolution as a creator, and in a lot of people's opinion, him kind of losing the rail a little bit at some points.
Sin City came out before this.
Yeah, so this is maybe, and I've heard people talk, it's like, oh, Batman through the the Sin City spyglass or whatever.
I mean, you can see that. I mean, I think Sin City's art is much more striking and like I think has aged better than I think this, and just like Dark Knight Returns, like the art in that is fantastic. It's like looks better every time you look at it, and Dark Knight Strikes Again was a big swing. They kind of
yep, big swing.
Quite, like I don't think it quite worked the way you wanted it to.
But ultimately, did you enjoy revisiting it after a long time away?
Yeah. I was like, oh yeah, okay, I get this. Like, I mean, it had been probably since it came out, to be honest. Like, I don't think I've ever sat down like since then and like been like, I need to read this. Like,
I think I read it whenever the Absolute came out, and I don't know if I read it all the way through. And there is some really cool stuff going on in here. There's also some really wacky what were they thinking stuff, if I remember correctly. And it's just like it suffers because it's obviously compared to DKR. I think you're right with what you had said earlier. If they had just released this as Frank Miller's Justice League, people would have thought it was weird, but not come in with the expectations of, it's the Godfather 3, right?
Yeah, it's like, oh, this is all right. Like, there's cool parts of this story, like, but to be like it but having like the Dark Knight attachment to it, it's sort of like, I don't, maybe if you told me this wasn't that Batman, I'd be like, it's not, okay. Like, let's do Frank Miller's Justice League,
it's hard to, and there are very few people that have a chance to follow up something that's considered like a cornerstone work. It's not to pivot away from this too soon, but it's one of the things I really liked about Tom King's Rorschach is that it was grounded in the Watchmen series, the Alan Moore, Dave Gibbons Watchmen series, but it told its own story. But I think it did it in a way that wasn't Dark Knight Strikes Back. It wasn't that. It wasn't that huge departure or huge swing. Still a good story. It's one of my favorite books of the last few years. But it's hard to follow stuff like that up. Are there any other like success stories of like mighty follow-ups to cherished stories out there?
No, not off the top of my head.
Right.
I'm like, it's like we're coming back to one last trip with the old Dark Knight fountain. And it was like,
it's it. Yep.
Saying it, man.
Not so much.
I miss Klaus. I miss Klaus on Frank Miller. That's what that's the...
So Klaus Janson is not. Was it Lynn Varney on colors?
Yeah,
and that was kind of the switch to digital colors, and probably not completely, no pun intended, fleshed out in this. It was the colors were jarring.
Like but it's
also late
good
90s.
trip down memory lane. Trip down memory lane.
I don't know if I would consider this, a modern classic, and that's something I want to, get into a little bit later. But there are books, and I think this is one that a lot of people maybe got shooed away from reading it, and it may be like a blind spot. So I was thinking today about different books or different series out there that a lot of people consider like must reads, but that you haven't read. Do you have any? It's kind of the opposite of the guilty pleasure comic. Are there things out there in the this is something that everyone should have read? It's like Mouse, would be one.
Oh,
if you haven't read like Mouse or I
don't have a specific book.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say I don't think I've ever read a comic with Kang in it.
Really?
Yeah.
Like none of the old Avengers stuff?
No. I mean, I've read it. I mean, maybe I don't remember it, but I'm just like,
Okay.
like I do not know a single thing about that character.
If someone tied me down and said, recount a classic Kang story, I would have trouble.
You would okay, because I'm like, okay, like he's been like, how have I never read?
I understand who the character is and his kind of origin story. I probably know more about like Iron Lad is young Kang in the Young Avengers.
Yeah.
Okay, I could see that. That's yeah, I mean, he's basically a 60s, 70s Avengers villain, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Never read it. I guess maybe. I could be wrong. And I simply do not remember because it was boring or I didn't care. Or I'm old.
I hope our buddy Will Pfeiffer is not watching this because
Alpha Flight. I don't know if I've ever read.
You've never read Alpha Flight? Like the first 12 issues of Alpha Flight, you've never read them?
I don't know, maybe one or something somewhere.
Now this is 12-year-old Chris saying this, but dude, you should read the first 12 issues of Alpha Flight. After that, it gets a little kind of loses the center for obvious reasons. Once you can I spoil issue 12 for you?
Yeah. I mean, I know what happens in issue 12. I've cognizant of but never read it.
You should. I would be interested what you would think because it was a different book at the time. Because that's where John Byrne really goes into the I'm not going to fucking draw backgrounds.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I'll read it and I'll tell you what I think of John Byrne's lack of backgrounds.
It's I think a deliberately conscious decision on his part, whether it's visual, whether he's wanting to make a visual statement or bring things into the forefront. But yeah, he gives fuck all about backgrounds. There's a lot of just like flat color
just like a blue background.
It's Canada, so it's
so that is what Canada's like.
It's a lot of sky, right?
A lot of sky.
There is one page that and it's funny. I had read an interview about it. There's kind of a famous page in there where the character Snowbird, I think that's her name, Snowbird, gets caught in a blizzard, and the page is just white with a
there you go. He's just trying to do the least amount of work.
Well, and they asked him, it's like, did you get paid your normal page rate for that? And he's like, yes, I did, but they told me to not do that again. So he basically had a blank page of art. It was just completely white, but yeah, he got paid his page rate because he was fucking John Byrne. You can do shit.
John Byrne.
Yeah,
he wrote that.
Yeah,
he still wrote it.
Exactly. So yeah, it was very fond memories of
all right, Chris, I will read Alpha Flight and I'll tell you what I think. What if I hate it though? Are you gonna be like
it's
sad if I'm like it's all right?
It's I don't remember if they get into it, but you have like Marvel's first like out gay character is an Alpha Flight. I don't know if they address it that early. It was a perfect John Byrne comic, because you go back and you listen to him talk about what his favorite, comics were growing up. You've heard his quote about the top 100 comics of all time,
Yeah.
or Fantastic Four,
The
1
first
through
four,
100.
1 through 100. Yeah.
Alpha Flight is very Fantastic Four in that the team members do not get along. They're constantly fighting with each other. It's a soap opera. It's like the Claremont Byrne X-Men, where it was very soap opera-ish. And I think Alpha Flight, I know Guardian and several other members debuted in those X-Men issues, those kind of early Claremont Byrne issues. They were out of the pages of the X-Men, and all of that like team angst is in there. It's a very angsty team book.
Canadian angst.
A lot of polite angst. Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, neat ideas, some really cool characters, and it's that John Byrne 1980s sensibility of comics. Yeah, I enjoy it. Part of my childhood, for sure.
I'll read it and I'll tell you what I think.
Yeah. Let me see here. Oh, Wayne said you didn't read Avengers Forever. So Will be very angry. I've never read a single issue of 8 Ball.
Huh.
It's by Chicagoan Daniel Klaus, right? And it's like indie, one of the like true like North Stars of indie comics. This is what, the 90s, the late 80s, 90s. 8 Ball was coming out. I'm asking as someone who's never read 8 Ball.
Yeah. I forget when it came out. I've read a few issues in my day.
How did you like? I mean, that's where oh shit, what's the ScarJo movie? Ghost World. Did Ghost World come out of 8 Ball? Were those 8 Ball stories?
Oh my god, I can't remember. You're asking me a lot of questions.
I need to talk to Will about this.
Where it's like, I don't know.
But about that same time. But yeah, my Dan Klaus knowledge is not where it should be. So I'm going to try and fix that. I've got a couple of his other.
It ran from 1989 to 2004.
Oh wow, that's hilarious because that's 18 issues.
Yeah, try it. I'm on Wikipedia.
Years.
It says 23 issues.
Okay, there must be some supplementals, because I think this is available on Amazon. This is the complete 8 Ball. Apparently, it's not complete because it's issues 1 through 18. But there was a hardcover that got super effing expensive, so they released the complete 8 Ball and paperback. And I was like, well, I better get that at this point.
You're like, I gotta get that.
Yeah. So 8 Ball, Alpha Flight.
Two comics that often get named together.
Do you have anything in you feel like you should have read it, you tried, it didn't stick?
Oh, I'm sure if I thought about it. Nothing like off the top of my head that like I'm like, I need to read that.
Yeah.
I need to read that.
Sandman for me for years until the podcast or the audio book, and then the TV show came out. That finally got me kind of over the hump where I can read those and have it kind of resonate with me a little bit.
Yeah.
It was a little bit of
I struggle with those. Yeah. There's a lot of words. I like Sandman, but like it's not an easy read.
Yeah.
It's like a real like damn, dude, you put all the words in this story,
You should write novels. Oh, okay.
It's like, that's it. That's why I was sort of impressed by the TV show. Where I was like, oh, actually, this is kind of a cool way to tell this story, like without like at times the wordiness of Sandman can kind of make it hard to like get totally into it Whereas like the concepts were
Yeah.
awesome, but it was like, ugh.
Well, it's that the whole idea of we're gonna tell this big story, but we're also going to do it with the monster of the week, or the offshoot story, and tell individual stories that kind of fit in between the larger story, the umbrella of
Yeah.
this. Um Reminds me, like X-Files, did that. But yeah, that's that was one for a long time for me, was Sandman.
And finally you did it. And finally you got yourself.
Well, we
Right.
were talking about, Pat Mills. Is it Pat Mills that wrote Martial Law?
Yep.
Like 2000 AD. Have you ever done the deep dive on the Judge Dredd?
Oh, I've read some Judge Dredd. I wouldn't consider it like a deep dive,
Yeah.
but I've read some Judge Dredd in the past.
And you like it?
Yeah, sometimes. Sometimes it's sort of like, oh yeah, I get it. I get, like, I don't know. It's like, I enjoy it. I think the concept is awesome, and it's nice to get a taste of it every once in a while. But I don't know if I'd be like, gotta give me that Judge Dredd, fix every month to like get in there. I'm always like, yeah, that's Judge Dredd.
It's not that warm, cozy blanket. It's like, oh yeah, I think I'll curl up with some Judge
I'm
Dredd.
American. I'm American.
Do you?
I'm sure there's some British guy who finds it
sure.
comforting.
Oh, I'd say a lot.
Yeah.
Do you have, what is that comic for you that, what? I just want to read something familiar. I want to read something that I know I enjoy, but I haven't read in a while. Do you have that comic? Or I know
there's books I read every year. I always read Crisis every year, and then I always read. Nowadays, I read like All Star Superman probably once a year. Like
why?
So it's like,
why Crisis?
I don't know. It's just like fun to read it, and like, I just think it's a fun comic.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, oh yeah, look at all these characters. Yeah, this is
George Perez drew them all.
He drew all of them, yeah. And so I was like, oh yeah, this is a real mess of a book. But yeah, it's just fun. I mean, it's like, it's always good. George Perez's art is amazing.
Yeah.
And to see him draw like literally everything in the DC universe as they like also kill a bunch of it is worth the price of admission.
The Roy Thomas quote is one that I will always cherish whenever I think of Crisis. If Crisis were a baby, I would have smothered it in its crib.
Yeah.
Because it basically killed like all of the books that he was working on.
His little universe, his little Earth 2, his little corner that he had carved out got decimated.
What was he working? Was he working on JSA?
No, it was like Infinity Inc.
Oh, that's right.
Like All-Star Squadron.
Mm-hmm.
Like stuff like that he kind of had his own little corner, like the Earth 2 corner, and was sort of like running over there, and then that ended. Then they kind of like figure out some way of like, oh, I guess
Roy, sorry, we're gonna kill off all your characters because we're doing this complete overhaul of the universe.
Well, most of them were okay in Infinity Inc. They had to do like a weird, like, now this person is the son of so and so, just like, all right, we'll just like make it up as we go, So like, never quite totally recovered, but it was, it was still living on.
Do you with God, what is it now? Is it almost 40 years of hindsight? Do you think that Crisis was ultimately a good idea to do that, to kind of like unify all of the nuttiness
Yeah, sure.
into one, kind of controllable area?
I mean, yeah, but then it became, yeah, it's you're trying
Yeah.
to
It's an
you're trying
accordion,
to
right?
impose
Yeah.
you're trying to impose like real world rules onto like fantastical fiction. Like it's just not gonna people are gonna write things that like don't fit
Yeah.
it exactly,
Yeah.
so it's like it's a very adult thing to do
Mhm.
to try and like organize it.
And
And
then
there's a very
here comes Grant Morrison with, the Doom
yeah, let's
Patrol.
have all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, like let's have a bunch of them. But yeah, I mean, I think the story is cool. I mean, the thing is like it's not because of Crisis that like people stop buying war comics. Those were ending. Like
Yeah.
there's a bunch of that stuff that's just it was ending. Like that was just like you weren't gonna have like
The
caveman
losers.
comics. Yeah, and all the like those things were dying. So it was like in a way it was like a little love letter to like the past of comics. Like there aren't war comics. Like you're not going to find like a Sergeant Rock comic like every month out there. So it was, just a changing of like the culture of comics
Mm-hmm.
to the direct market,
I
world.
do you think it was a reaction to, obviously Marvel had what I think at that point was a pretty cohesive universe. It's like before we called it the MCU. It's most things in Marvel existed in one canon, right?
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, you think about what that entailed, though. In reality, it was like Spider-Man being like, "There's Thor," and
Yeah.
Thor swings back. Like it's like sure that happens in the same universe. Like it was not like this tightly interwoven like story as much as it
No.
was like you could just like they would run across each other and it would be like, "There goes Spider-Man." Check in on what he's doing in Amazing Spider-Man 245. Like so it was like just loose, like connected in that sense. I mean, probably not connected in the way people, for whatever reason, want their comics to be connected now. In the sense of like this is, like serialized television where all these things connect with each other, or like the Marvel movies. We're going to tell you.
It was never
like,
that tight. It
the
was
order,
yeah.
like the order. Yeah, no,
Like
there
after about 1968, it was never that tight. I think whenever there were like maybe like 5 comics on the Marvel comics on the stands, it was
then
it was cohesive then.
Yeah, and then this was never, never been cohesive in that sense, or in the way that like even like the movies are like this is the next movie, and then this like very carefully, like as we've said before, it's just like these dudes are just trying to like this comic's got to come out in 4 weeks, so like let's do this, like it's not this super like thought out like multi-year movie making extravaganza. It's like I guess Spider-Man's gonna fight the Chameleon this month.
It's funny
like
they could never really fuck up New York that bad in any of the comics because they all lived in New York.
Yeah, exactly. So it was like, Ultron can't like level all of New York.
Yeah.
No
one's
Spider-Man...
gonna tear down the Empire State Building.
Yeah.
Which was Did you read? I know that you were more of a DC guy, but did you read the Marvel team up books like Marvel 2-in-1?
Oh, I've read some of those. Yeah,
those were always some of my favorite comics. That's those are the comics that would for nerdy kids turn you into like a big Captain Britain fan. Because you love that was one of my favorite Marvel team ups growing up, was the Spider-Man Captain Britain.
Oh, yeah.
That was the scepter wielding Brian Braddock before the what was it? Was it Alan Moore and Alan Davis who did the redesign on Captain Britain?
No, Alan Davis did.
Was that Alan Moore?
I don't think so.
I will have to pull out the old Omnibuy later tonight, but because a lot of those were the British Captain Britain comics were Alan Moore, Alan Davis, right?
I don't know.
Let me see here.
Oh, here we go.
Here we go. I'm going in. Yeah, Jamie Delano. Yeah, it was Alan Moore and Jamie Delano. And then you get Dave Thorpe, Paul Neary, even Alan Davis a few. But yeah, it looks like this first one, which is the Marvel Superheroes. I think that's the first of the revamped.
Oh yeah,
which is one of my favorite uniforms. I love the Captain Britain uniform.
There you go.
The Union Jack style Captain Britain.
I'm now just looking up Captain Marvel pictures.
Or Captain Marvel or Captain Britain.
All of it.
Yeah. That was another one until probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I had never read The Death of Captain Marvel.
Oh, okay.
And then I found it. I found the graphic novel in a dollar bin at Dark Tower, and I was like, "Oh, I guess I should read this."
You're like, yeah, I guess I should try this.
Yeah, I was like, the Marvel Cosmic was not something that I sought out. That was like 8-10 years before I started really reading comics. Was the Starlin, like 7. Those are a lot of Bronze Age Marvel, and really the only Bronze Age Marvel I was reading at that point was the old Uncanny X-Men stuff.
Yeah, I was just what was it? Oh yeah, it was the forward to Swamp Thing. Whoever wrote the forward, it was saying like, I grew up on those comics about like sidekicks with heroin addictions or like Captain Marvel dying, and like felt like they were like, these are kind of like adult stories, but not really. And then in comparison to like Swamp Thing or that, where it's like, oh, okay, actually this is like what I thought those were, where it's like,
my parents really wouldn't want me reading this.
Yeah, like perhaps this is overinflated, like a lot, God, the Neil Adams Green Lantern, Green Arrow, which looks beautiful, but just is like, I don't know. I don't love the writing in those, it's from a different, I know it's from a different time, but like it does have that air of like, I guess this is like a serious thing, kind of, but the best you could do at that point.
Denny O'Neil was writing stories at DC that up until that point weren't being written, and he was doing it. He had talked about the difficulties of writing comics at DC in the late 60s and early 70s because of the popularity of the Batman TV show.
Yeah.
That there was an expectation of Bam Pow, that honest to God, it's 2022, and I'll guarantee you we'll see at least 5 headlines this year from reputable journalistic outlets that will say, "Bam, pow, bang, comics aren't for kids anymore."
Well, that's just a testament to how genius the Batman TV show was.
Is that what it is?
It is. That it has that level of staying power. I mean, one of my favorite Joker stories is in the Batman TV show when he decides to become a modern artist, and like
That is a good episode.
it's great. You know, it's like I just always remember like being like I loved that Batman movie, the Adam West Batman movie when I was a kid. Just I loved that so much. And then it took me years to be like, oh, like they were then for a while I was like, oh, this stinks. And then I was like, oh no, like they were doing this on purpose.
Oh,
like
yeah.
it's supposed and then it's like, oh, okay, I get it. Like what like the campiness of it or the funniness of it. But yeah, that Joker story is like one of my favorite Joker stories. Like I always thought like sort of the way that they treated those characters in that show was like just like a different universe of like the Joker's not like they're all bad guys, but they're never really doing anything. Like they're always
they're just being bad guys.
Absurdly robbing a bank in like an insane way or trying to become
In broad daylight.
rich people by becoming like a modern artist, but you actually turn out to be like extremely popular and critically acclaimed as like just like it's so funny.
Yeah.
So like the Biff Bang Pow I think is a small part of that should be a testament to the staying power of that Batman series, of like the stranglehold it seems to have on comics. It made a huge impression on
a lot of people.
A lot of people. Like a very visually and like humor wise, and so kudos.
And I love that DC kind of embraced it a few years ago and did the Batman 66 series. Yeah. Our buddy Brent Schoonover did some of the art on that. Just it was kind of in his wheelhouse art wise. I do. It was great, and it kind of defined Batman for an era. I think it primed. Without the Batman 66, I don't think we have the Super Friends in the 80s.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's all that. Yeah.
The Hey Chum.
I mean, it's a huge part of Batman being such a cultural icon.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and as I have to go in a couple minutes, so we should probably
wrap up
this. But
I'm gonna text Sal and ask him how we end this.
How do you end the show? I was gonna say I showed
this.
My son loves in the Batman 66 movie the whole bit of them having like that sea captain guy kidnapped and they're pretending that he's on a boat. So they have to, they have to go through all the machinations of like he thinks he's on a boat where they have like things going in front of the window. It's just so funny and like imaginative and like my son just loves it. He hates any kissing parts though. None of the when Batman, where Adam West is like putting the moves on.
Was it Eartha Kitt?
Catwoman. No, it was
no. Oh God, who played Catwoman in the
movie?
In the Batman series. Hold on. You talk. Sal's texting.
Oh my God. We're getting text. Sal knows how to do all the things on the show. Like he knows where all the buttons are. Like we just started there. We just hit the go button. Now we don't know what to do. We might have to just record for like a day. Hour.
All right.
Podcast.
So are we let's wrap up. I'm gonna play the outro, but then we might stick around for a little bit. Here comes Sal. Here, I'm gonna turn.
Oh my God, this show is such a mess.
Right? All right. Tom, it's been great chatting with you. We'll
It's
be
been good
back.
talking to you.
We'll be back again next week.
Yeah, I hope so.
Maybe maybe this
Yeah.
just records forever. In the
Chris just
meantime,
leaves a permanent live stream of him looking at books.
it's just coming in here in my underwear, grabbing. It's like maybe I should read Alpha Flight.
It's just every 15 minutes, if you watch this live stream, Chris will hold up a hardcover book to the camera and just like to show you what he owns.
It's the new Teen Titans. That's another.
Yeah, it's like, and then he puts it back on a shelf and he walks away.
I keep all my favorite ones here. All right, Tom.
So long.
In the meantime,
In between time.
there you go. You got to do it this time. We'll be everywhere in
And
and
around.
around.
Oh, comics.
I hope Sal just hits the stop button.
It's like, oh my God. You guys, this.
Ah!